What's up? So today we're going to be talking about plate tectonics. Now this is stuff that should all seem familiar to you guys. You guys have heard these terms before. So please make sure that you're writing down. There's going to be a lot of vocab. If you need to stop it, make sure that you've got it. You should have your reference table out because at the end we're going to talk about one of the pages in the reference table that we've touched upon, but we haven't clarified every point that's on it. Today we will be doing that. So please make sure you have your reference table. Please make sure you're ready to learn, and let's go.
All right, guys, so the idea of plate tectonics basically starts with the man in front of you. He's a scientist by the name of Alfred Wegener, and he wrote this book called On the Origin of Continents and Oceans. And he came up with the idea that the continents have not always sat where they sit today. He believed that the continents moved from their starting location to their present-day location. He called this continental drift. He believed that at one point in the past, all the continents of the Earth formed one massive supercontinent called Pangaea, which you see before you. This is his original idea of it. Okay, now this wasn't the most popular idea in the world. In fact, he was a laughing stock and people thought he was crazy. People thought the continents had always been where they had been and that they never moved. But we now know that he was 100% correct, and that our modern map of Pangaea, which is what you've been looking at in front of you for a couple seconds, is pretty darn close to his concepts from his original books. So we basically call him the father of plate tectonics, because plate tectonics explains why continental drift occurs. Now, there are lots of pieces of evidence that have allowed scientists to come to the conclusion of plate tectonics, to devise this theory and understand what's going on in it. One of the simplest pieces of evidence is basically what we call the jigsaw puzzle map. If you've ever looked at a map of the world, you should have noticed that certain continents fit together. The best example is what you see in front of you right now, South America and Africa, specifically the eastern coast of South America and the western section of Africa seem to fit together like puzzle pieces. There are several other sections of the world where this happens as well. Pieces just naturally lock into each other. And a kid has realized this. In fact, my kids have a puzzle that actually does this specifically, where they put pieces of the earth together. And scientists looked at this, and a lot of scientists just dismissed it as, happenstance, or it existed. But it's actually true. Another key piece of evidence is fossil evidence. Now remember, fossils are the remains or impressions of creatures that once lived in a particular location. Now, as we've studied life throughout Earth's 4.6 billion year history, what we discovered is we found remains of species of creatures in dramatically different places. For example, if you look at the picture in front of you right now, you see a series of creatures. Some of them are very strange looking, I understand, but if we look at them, you notice that they're located in very different places. For example, if you look at the red one, the Mesosaurus. Mesosaurus is a species of creature that lived in the oceans. It's a relative of reptiles. It's not a dinosaur, but it did live during the time of the dinosaurs. Now, we have found Mesosaurus fossils, one in the interior of both Africa and South America, separated by hundreds, if not thousands, of kilometers. Now, how could that be possible? Okay, to find the same species living on completely different continents. Now, some people said, oh, well, it's possible that they were washed up there. It's possible that all sorts of things occurred, and the creature, it's oceanic, so it's possible there was a massive ocean that stretched completely across and drowned both the center of Africa and the center of South America, and the creature lived there. So people kind of chalked it up to that one. But the other two pictures on this are the ones that present a huge problem. And that would be the Lystrosaurus and the Glossopteris fossil, plant fossil. The Lystrosaurus, if you look at him, kind of looks like a weird mole, rat, fat lizard sort of thing. That's the best way I can explain it. Okay, Lystrosaurus were creatures that lived at the beginning of the Triassic period. Okay, and their fossils have been found in Africa, okay, lizards in Africa, India, okay, and Antarctica. Okay, and you can see that by the blue line that's on the page right now. Now, Lystrosaurus are creatures that, look at them. Do they look like they moved fast? You're not talking huge migrating herds that can move. Plus, think about the distances. Okay, Africa to India, there's a connection through the Middle East. You could say maybe the creatures traveled that way. But how the heck did they get to Antarctica? And how did a lizard live in Antarctica? Finding a fossil of a creature like this in those three very distinct places, something's not adding up. And the last one is the fossilized leaf of the Glossopteris. Okay, here you found this plant in South America, Africa, this is the green one we're talking about, India, Antarctica, and Australia. Seriously? Okay, this is a tropical leaf. There's no way that this thing could have traveled to all these different places unless all these places were touching, and it could easily be transported by creatures or by simple water running or something like that. The fact that these fossils are found on different places, very far apart, for species that were not capable of moving. Otherwise, now people tried to explain there were land bridges, but where did these land bridges go? And there are other stories that are out there. But the fossil evidence is a huge piece of evidence. Another piece, obviously, is geologic evidence. What we find is we find beds of the exact same type of rock dated to the exact same time, but on completely different areas. For example, we find red sandstones on the eastern coast of South America and the western coast of Africa. If we look at North America and Europe, we actually find a great example. We find a mountain chain where the rocks are almost chemically identical. They're dated to roughly the same age, but they are separated by the Atlantic Ocean. Now, how did this happen? Well, these mountains, we believe, used to all be one solid chain that ran the length of this entire area. And the Atlantic Ocean didn't exist. The Atlantic Ocean started as a divergent boundary and split this mountain chain in half. And so today we have the Appalachian Mountains in eastern North America and the Caledonian Mountains that run throughout Scandinavia and the British Isles. We also have evidence from ancient climates, or what we call paleoclimatology. When we look at regions of the earth, we sometimes find plants or animals that existed in tropical forests. For example, we find palm trees in Siberia. We shouldn't be able to find that. Siberia is incredibly cold. Palm trees only grow in warm places. But what does that tell us? That tells us that the climate was different. Now, it's possible that the global climate was different, but it's also possible that this place was located closer to the equator in the past. Another example of an ancient climate would be the evidence that you see in front of you right now. Here we have a young woman looking at scratch marks in the ground. What do we call those scratch marks in the ground? Those are striations. Those are glacial striations. What does this tell you? This tells you that at some point in the past, this area where she was standing was covered in glaciers. Now, this presents a problem because this place where she's standing is Australia, and Australia does not have glaciers today. There's not a single glacier on the entire continent of Australia. But this is telling us that at one point in the past, there were glaciers in Australia. Now, how does that work? Well, when we date these striations, what we find is that these striations are very similar to the striations we see in all the countries that you see in the picture in front of you right now. In South America and Africa and India, we have striations dating from around the same time. Now, that either means that we had a glacier that stretched from Antarctica all the way up to India past the equator, went over the equator and past. Not likely. Or what's more likely is that one time these guys were all bunched together and a glacier radiated out from Antarctica and covered these portions of the globe. And we see this in other places as well, but this gives us an idea that at one time these guys were all stuck together and have since drifted apart. The last piece of evidence we have is what we call paleomagnetism. If you haven't gotten the clue now, paleo means ancient, and magnetism, obviously, you know what that word means. Okay? And when we talk about paleomagnetism, what we're talking about is either polar wandering or magnetic reversals. Now, what does this mean? Well, imagine lava comes out of a volcano or a rift or some sort of a volcanic feature. That lava has little tiny atoms of iron in it, which are going to act like tiny little magnets, and they're going to align themselves with the magnetic poles of the earth. Now, once the lava hardens, those atoms are going to get locked in place, all pointing towards where magnetic north was. What we've discovered is, as we've looked at these, we can actually track the movement of the plates by tracking the directionality that these little tiny mini magnets of iron frozen in lava flows and things like that are pointing, and they tell us that the plates and the continents that they're on have drifted over time. This is actually one of the best pieces of evidence we have. They also give us the indication that sometimes the North Pole switches. So what's magnetic north and what's directional north aren't always the same thing. They have flip-flopped over time. The picture you're looking before you now shows you what normal polarity looks like versus reverse polarity versus normal polarity. Now, what does that mean? It's basically saying the North Pole is where the North geographic pole is in one picture, and then it flips and then it flips again. And what happens is the orientation of the rocks. Now they're showing you this as the white pattern being normal polarity and the red pattern being the reverse polarity. And when we see this, we can actually see that it flops from one side to the other. And this has actually allowed us to come up with a clock to mention these things and understand what's going on and actually track once again how the plates have moved over time. So if you look at the picture in front of you right now, the white would represent when the pole is located normally, the red is when it's reversed, and we can see how it constantly just changes over and over and over and over and over again. And so all of this evidence has helped us push towards the theory of plate tectonics. Okay, and what the theory of plate tectonics basically says is that the Earth's lithosphere, the crust, is broken up into about 24 pieces, which we call plates. And these plates kind of float over the asthenosphere. Why? Because they have a lower density than what's below them. So just like a piece of cardboard floating on a piece of water, they're going to float. And the other thing is that the theory of plate tectonics tells us that these plates are in constant motion. Now, why are they in motion? Well, because of those convection cells that we were talking about. So like you see before you, these big loops of alternating rising hot fluid and sinking cold fluid. These big loops drag the plates around above them. If you look at the picture in front of you now, you can actually see this. So you have that heat rising from the core in these mantle plumes, okay? It reaches the crust, okay? And it loops around. As it reaches the crust, it loses some of that heat because obviously some gets lost, through volcanism and things like that, and it starts to drag the plate down with it. And so you get these big loops, and so you're going to get places where the plates are moving apart from each other and places where the plates are moving at each other. And this ultimately creates what we call plate boundaries, okay? And plate boundaries are where plates come in contact with each other. Okay, and some of them slam into each other, some of them get dragged underneath each other, and some of them split apart. Hey guys, so in filming this I realized I went over time and it won't fit as just one video on YouTube, so I have to split it into 2 different parts. So this is the end of part 1. You will be responsible for both parts on the upcoming exam, so please now go watch part 2. You want to take a break, get something to drink, get something to eat, chill out for a couple minutes, but please make sure you watch both videos. Alright guys?